I thought I was stepping back into the life I left behind, ready to surprise the daughter who once waited by windows for me. But when I opened that door expecting her arms, I found her on her knees, wearing a torn apron that wasn't hers, scrubbing a floor she once danced on, with bruises blooming like secrets across her skin. And the silence she looked at me with was not the silence of shock. It was the silence of someone who has learned to survive without being heard. For 10 years I lived with the illusion that time could be paused, like a familiar song waiting for me to press play again. 10 years abroad, chasing contracts I convinced myself were for her future, her education, her security. 10 years repeating the same promise under different skies. When this last deal is done, I'll go home. I'll go back to her. My daughter was 18 when I left, too old to need bedtime stories, too young to hide loneliness behind adult excuses. She stood at the airport gate in her favorite navy sweater, waving with both hands, smiling through a fear she never told me about. I hugged her until the final boarding call, whispered that I'd be gone only a year, maybe 2, and she whispered back something that haunts me even now. Just don't forget who's waiting for you, Dad. But years have a way of lengthening themselves when ambition sharpens into obsession. 1 contract became 2. 2 became 7. Cities blurred. I wrote emails instead of coming home, sent money instead of presents, and every birthday I missed was wrapped in the same apology. Next year, princess. Next year for sure. I thought providing was the same as protecting. I thought love could be wired through bank transfers and international calls. But distance builds its own kind of weather. And I didn't know how cold it had grown around her until the day I finally returned. The flight from Barcelona touched down on a gray afternoon. I remember how the sky hung low, as if weighed down by the very years I'd been away. At baggage claim I practiced the words I imagined she needed to hear. Apologies shaped like promises, promises shaped like second chances. For the first time in a decade, I felt nervous to be a father again. I rented a car and drove through the town that had once held our routines like quiet rituals. The bakery where we used to buy cinnamon rolls was gone. The bookstore replaced by a sleek cafe that felt too polished to smell like paper. The houses down Willow Lane looked the same, but older somehow, as if time had leaned heavily on their roofs. But her house, the house I bought her before leaving, stood unchanged. White paneling, lavender bushes on either side of the porch, the chimney leaning slightly the way it always did, like it was listening. I parked across the street, palms sweating around the steering wheel. In my mind, she would open the door and run to me. Still the girl who chased fireflies in our backyard and fell asleep clutching stories she believed had magic in them. But magic, I would soon learn, had long been drained from this place. I climbed the steps with my heart in my throat. Before I could knock, the door creaked open on its own, pushed by a draft. I stepped inside the dim foyer, the scent of lemon cleaner thick in the air. My eyes adjusted slowly. Then I saw her. My daughter. Kneeling. On the floor. Her hair tied back in the same messy knot she used to make when she was rushing to school, but now streaked with exhaustion instead of youth. Her hands raw. Her arms bruised. A gray apron wrapping her like a claim someone else had written on her life. She was scrubbing the wooden floorboards I once polished while teaching her how to walk on them. The bucket beside her held murky water. A pair of men's boots stood inches from her, planted like territory markers. For a heartbeat, she didn't notice me. She was too focused on a patch of dirt that didn't seem to exist, scrubbing it with a desperation that sounded like pleading. When she finally lifted her head, the world between us broke open. Her face froze. Not in joy, not even in fear, but in the startled resignation of someone who has learned not to expect rescue. "Dad?" she whispered. Not with the brightness of reunion, with the disbelief of someone seeing a ghost. I opened my mouth to speak, but the sound that came out was barely human. What are you doing on the floor?" A voice answered from behind her steps, a voice that did not belong to her. "She's doing what she's supposed to." A man walked out from the kitchen. Broad shoulders, loosened tie, the kind of entitlement that sours the very air around it. He looked at me with mild irritation, as though I had walked into a business meeting uninvited. My daughter lowered her gaze immediately, reflexively, habitually. "Stand up," I said softly. She didn't move. "Stand up, sweetheart," I repeated, my voice shaking. The man stepped closer. then placed a hand on her shoulder. She stands when she's told to. When she's told to. A fire lit in me, the kind of fire that fathers feel before they understand what they're burning toward. She flinched under his touch, and that small movement nearly killed me. My daughter, the girl who once slammed doors in teenage rebellion, who laughed loudly, who loved fiercely, was shrinking. Shrinking in her own home. My home. What is going on? I demanded. The man smirked. You're early. She was going to explain everything once she was done with her chores. 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 The word echoed like an insult thrown across generations. My daughter tried to speak, but her voice trembled into nothing. She reached for the bucket, as though she feared stopping would cost her something. I stepped forward and gently took the rag from her trembling hand. You don't clean floors, I said. You don't kneel for anyone. Not in this house. Not anywhere. Her eyes filled, but she forced the tears back like someone trained not to show weakness. Dad, she whispered. It's not what you think. But bruises never lie. Silence never lies. And the apron tied around her waist, the apron that read Hamilton Family Maid, told a story her mouth was too afraid to tell. In that moment, I felt the years I'd been gone collapse into a single truth. I left to give her the world, and I returned to find hers stolen. Yet something deeper than anger stirred in me. Something quiet, patient, and deadly focused. Because a man who returns after 10 years does not come home to watch his daughter kneel. He comes home to make sure she rises. And before that night was over, someone in that house would learn what fathers become when silence tries to own their children. The air inside the house felt heavy. Not with dust, not with time, but with a kind of fear that clings to the walls long after footsteps leave. I could feel it before she spoke, before the man smirked, before my daughter dared to lift her eyes again. It was the kind of fear that grows in a place slowly like mold, unseen until it's everywhere. As I stood there silently, something inside me began taking inventory of the life I thought she lived. The framed pictures on the hallway wall, none of her. The coat hooks by the door, only his jacket, his scarf, his umbrella. The small bench where she used to leave her school bag, empty, except for a cleaning caddy neatly arranged with gloves and rags, as though it had been placed there deliberately, like part of her uniform. This wasn't a home. It was a hierarchy. My daughter pulled her hand back from mine the moment he shifted. Like a reflex. Like she had learned that even a moment of closeness was a risk she couldn't afford. I inhaled, steadying myself. Tell me his name, I said, eyes locked on my daughter. She hesitated, too long, far too long for someone who should have been living freely under her own roof. He answered for her. Hamilton, he said. Mark Hamilton. The surname hit harder than I expected. I'd heard of the Hamiltons, old money wrapped in good suits and bad manners. A family that didn't build wealth, but inherited it like a throne, passing it from one cold generation to another. Their reputation carried the kind of entitlement that believed respect could be bought, and silence could be trained. What are you doing in my daughter's house? I asked quietly. He smiled, hands sliding casually into his pockets. This is my house. I felt the world tilt, not in shock, but in the slow realization that the ground beneath my daughter had been shifting long before I arrived. My daughter lives here, I said. I bought this home for her. You bought, he said. But she signed. My daughter flinched when he spoke, as though each word tightened something around her. I turned to her gently. Sweetheart, what does he mean? Her throat worked but no sound came. She looked down at the apron, then at the floor, then at the bucket beside her, as though searching for answers in the things she'd been forced to obey. Hamilton stepped closer, unbothered by the space he invaded. Don't put her in the middle of this. She made her decisions. You don't speak for her, I said, the calm in my voice sharper than any yell. Someone has to, he replied with a small shrug. She rarely speaks for herself. My daughter's shoulders curled inward. Something inside me cracked then, not with anger, but with grief so deep I had to steady my breath to carry it. I knelt beside her, ignoring the water soaking into my jeans. Princess, I whispered. Look at me. Slowly, painfully slowly, she raised her eyes. For a moment I saw everything she tried to hide. Sleeplessness woven into the edges of her gaze. Shame sitting beneath her breath. Resignation bruised into the softness of her arms. But when she looked at me fully, something else flickered. Something she thought she'd lost. A memory. A father. Promise. Tell me, I whispered. What happened here? Her lips parted, but before she could speak, Hamilton's tone hardened from casual arrogance into cold command. Enough. She doesn't need your interrogation. My daughter instantly pressed her hands to the floor, as though bracing for something. My blood ran cold. Stand up, he told her. She did. Without question. Without objection. Without even a moment to decide for herself. She stood like someone whose choices had been taken from her one by one, until obedience was the safest place to hide. Then I noticed something else, faint but unmistakable. The way she positioned her feet. Slightly apart. Hands behind her. Shoulders drawn. A stance. A posture. Not of a homeowner. Not of a partner. Not of a woman with autonomy. But of a servant awaiting instructions. I rose to my feet slowly, deliberately, because sudden movements had begun to make her flinch. You trained her to do that? Mark Hamilton didn't blink. She knows her role. And what role is that? I asked. A maid, he said simply. My daughter's breath caught, not because the word was new, but because hearing it spoken aloud was like being slapped in a quiet room. I looked at her again, really looked, as fathers do when the truth arrives without mercy. Is that what you are here? Her eyes dropped in apology she should never have had to carry. Hamilton folded his arms. Don't make this dramatic. She owes us. She needed help, we provided it. Owes. I repeated. He smirked as though the word entertained him. Yes. She came to us desperate. Couldn't manage the mortgage. Jobless. Didn't have the spine to ask you for help. My daughter winced again, subtle but devastating. And instead of helping her, I said, you turned her into labor. He shrugged. The arrangement works for us. And she accepted it. I turned to her. Is that true? Her silence was the loudest answer of all. Hamilton walked past her and tapped the wall lightly, as though inspecting property. She cooks. She cleans. She keeps the place running. And in return she lives here rent-free. Safe. Federal sheltered. Sheltered. As if she were an animal kept indoors, not a woman deserving dignity. My daughter began to wring her hands. A small anxious movement she used to do as a child when she broke something and feared punishment. I reached toward her hands. She pulled back instinctively, almost apologetically, as though touch itself was a luxury she wasn't allowed. That small recoil hurt more than any bruise I could see. I glanced at the marks on her arms, purple fading into yellow, scattered like constellations of someone else's authority. Who did this? I whispered. She trembled. Hamilton answered. Accidents happen when chores aren't done carefully. Accidents, I repeated, chest tightening. You weren't here, he said coldly. So she learned to survive without you. The words landed like a cruel truth dressed in a lie. I took a step closer, lowering my voice to a razor-thin calm that made him finally stiffen. I am here now. He smirked again, the same arrogant curl of his lip that told me he had never been held accountable in his life. And what exactly do you think you can do? He asked. I didn't answer him. I turned to my daughter. Princess, I whispered. Did you want this life? Tears pooled instantly, the kind she tried to blink away before they revealed anything dangerous. She shook her head once. Barely. Quietly. But with enough truth to break the spine of the room. Hamilton's face hardened. She knows better than to lie. For the first time since I stepped inside, my daughter spoke in a voice that wasn't quite hers. I'm fine, Dad, she whispered, rehearsed, practiced, terrified. I'm okay. She wasn't. She wasn't even close. A sound escaped her throat, part sob, part plea, and she covered her mouth quickly as though she'd violated a rule. Hamilton reached for her arm. She shrank. I stepped between them before his fingers touched her. He froze, startled not by my strength, but by something far more dangerous. The quiet of a father who has spent 10 years away from his child, only to come home and discover he must become a storm. My daughter whispered. Dad, please don't make things worse. My heart splintered. She wasn't protecting him. She was protecting herself from the consequences of my anger. And that was when the truth finally set in. She hadn't been living in this house. She had been surviving inside it. Hamilton scoffed. You shouldn't interfere. She knows her place here. I looked at him slowly, calmly, the way men do when something ancient wakes in their bones. No, I said. She forgot her place because no one reminded her. He smirked, misunderstanding. And what place is that? He asked. I stepped closer, so close his confidence finally cracked. Not beneath your thumb, I said. Not beneath your rules. And definitely not beneath your roof. My daughter stared at me with wide, frightened eyes. Frightened of hope, not him. Because hope was dangerous in a house that punished wanting. Pack your things, I told her gently. She froze. Hamilton laughed. A short, sharp sound. She's not going anywhere. But the moment the words left his mouth, something changed in the room. A shift, a tension, a subtle turning of the tide. My daughter looked at me. Really looked. For the first time since I arrived, I saw the faintest tremor of belief return to her spine. Then Hamilton stepped forward, attempting to reclaim control. And that was when I realized something I hadn't dared consider before. Hamilton wasn't the only danger in the house. He wasn't the only one she feared. He wasn't the only one whose shadow stretched across her days. There were others. Others inside these walls. Others whose voices echoed in her silence. And before the truth finished unraveling, I would come to understand just how deep the indignity went. How many hands had shaped her fear, how many names she whispered apologies to, how deeply she'd been conditioned to obey. The man's laughter was still hanging in the air when I felt it, that subtle shift in my daughter's breath. Fear loosens differently when hope enters a room. It doesn't fade, it trembles. The way her shoulders shook wasn't from weakness. It was from the shock of remembering she once had the right to stand tall. Hamilton didn't see it. Men like him rarely do. Predators mistake obedience for permanence. He stepped closer, crowding the space between us. She's not leaving. She belongs here. That word. Belongs. He said it with the same tone one might use for an object misplaced. My daughter flinched visibly, and something inside me sharpened. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. When a father who has been silent for too long finally speaks, the air itself listens. Who told you she belongs anywhere but where she chooses? I asked. Hamilton's smirk faltered. Not from fear but confusion. Control was the only language he knew. Anything outside of it sounded foreign. She knows her duties, he snapped. You should be grateful we kept her afloat. Grateful. The word hit me like cold water down the spine. I looked around the house, really looked. The scraped baseboards. The buckets tucked into corners. The faint scent of bleach clinging to the air like shame. The silence so practiced it had a pattern. This was not the life I imagined while working overseas. This was not the future I thought money could secure. This was the slow erosion of a girl who once believed the world had room for her dreams. Show me her room, I said quietly. My daughter's eyes widened in sudden panic. Not fear of me. Fear of what I would find. Hamilton opened his mouth to object. But something in my face made him step back instead. He gestured toward the hallway with a scoff. You won't like it. He was right. The hallway to the servants' quarters, yes, that's what it was now, was nothing like the warm corridor I remembered. The wallpaper was peeling, the lights dimmer, the quiet heavier. She walked ahead of us, shoulders hunched, each step careful, as though even the floor had rules she wasn't allowed to break. She stopped at a door near the very end of the hall. Not the master bedroom. Not the guest room. Not even the office converted into a cozy nook she once used for painting. No. Her door was small, narrow, and scratched by years of things being pushed against it. She hesitated before opening it, not out of shame, but out of the years she had learned to make herself smaller before revealing any space that belonged to her. The door creaked open. Inside was a room barely larger than a walk-in closet. A thin mattress, not even a bed frame. One pillow flattened by exhaustion. A single folded blanket. A plastic storage bin half cracked. No window. No warmth. No sign of identity. Just a maid's quarters. My daughter stood at the threshold, unable to step in. Her fingers tightened around the apron tied cruelly tight around her waist. I sleep fine, she whispered, the lie so gentle it nearly broke her voice. I stepped inside, crouching, touching the mattress with my hand. Cold. Damp. Unworthy of her. This is where you've been living? I asked. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. Hamilton leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. It's better than what she had before she came here. We gave her structure, purpose, a home. I rose slowly, turning to him. This is not a home. It's more than she'd manage alone, he shot back. I looked at my daughter. Is that what he told you? Her eyes flickered, guilt, shame, apology, all layered like bruises beneath the skin. Hamilton snorted in amusement. You think she stayed because she had choices? My daughter closed her eyes as if the truth were too heavy to carry all at once. What did you do to her? I asked him. His smile returned, small, smug, practiced. Nothing she didn't agree to. A tremor rippled through her. Agreement. Consent. Words people like him weaponize against the vulnerable. I stepped closer until I was inches from his face. Tell me exactly what she agreed to. He lifted his chin. Work. Obedience. Respect. Respect. I echoed. For the family, he added proudly. That was when I finally understood what she had been protecting. Not him. Not even herself. But the others. The unseen voices behind his commands. The ones who expected the floors to be spotless by dawn. The ones who handed her the apron on the first day and tightened the strings behind her back. The ones who watched her with critical eyes and measured her worth in silence. Who else lives here? I asked. Hamilton smirked. My parents. My sister. My uncle. They're all out at the moment. A household. A dynasty. A structure built on her labor. My daughter swallowed hard, pressing her fingernails into her palms to keep from shaking. I don't want trouble, she whispered. You already have it, I said softly. But not the kind you fear. Her breath quickened. Dad, please. They'll be angry if they find you here. I wasn't told you were coming. Told. I repeated. Hamilton shrugged. We have rules. Expectations. She informs us of her visitors. Visitors. As if I were a stranger dropping by unannounced. Tell me something, I said, turning to my daughter gently. How long have you been their maid? Her lips parted but no sound came. Hamilton answered. 2 years. 2 years. 2 years in this room. 2 years in this room. 2 years kneeling on floors she used to dance on. 2 years believing she was unworthy of anything better. I closed my eyes for a moment, the weight of my absence crushing every breath. When I looked at her again, she was trembling so hard her knees buckled. I caught her before she fell, lifting her into my arms the way I did when she was small and scraped her knee on the sidewalk. She buried her face in my shoulder, breathing in small broken gasps, the kind of breath someone takes when they're finally held after years of holding themselves. Hamilton scoffed behind me. She's being dramatic. I turned my head slowly, and the look I gave him was not the look of a man angry. It was the look of a man steadying himself before destroying an entire empire. She's leaving, I said. He laughed lightly. She isn't. She is. She's not allowed. She's my daughter. She signed a contract. She was coerced. She belongs to this household. She belongs to no one. She owes us. She owes you nothing. We'll take this to the courts. You won't survive the truth. He stiffened then, the first crack in his confidence appearing in the fine lines around his mouth. Before he could speak again, I whispered into my daughter's hair. Pack whatever you need. We're going now. Her grip tightened, desperate, frightened, hopeful. Hamilton stepped forward. You can't take her. I met his eyes without blinking. Watch me. Behind him, deeper in the house, I heard the first sound of a door opening. A voice, older, sharper, colder, echoed faintly from the hallway. Mark? What's going on out there? My daughter stiffened instantly. Hamilton smiled slowly. The family's home, he said. And they don't like disruptions. But I didn't put her down. I didn't back away. I didn't flinch. Because now I understood. Hamilton was only the surface of the nightmare. The roots were coming down the hall. And I was ready for every one of them. The footsteps came first, slow, measured, The kind that belonged to someone who believed the house tilted in their direction. My daughter's breath hitched against my shoulder, like her body remembered the rhythm of those footsteps long before her mind caught up. Hamilton didn't move aside. He stood there with that smug, self-satisfied posture, as if the reinforcements arriving would solidify his control, as if the presence of the family was enough to silence truth, bend morality, and keep her kneeling. But something he didn't yet understand was already happening. She was in my arms, and for the first time in years she wasn't apologizing for it. From around the corner, a woman appeared, mid-60s, dressed in a cream blouse and pearls that looked heavy with arrogance. Her hair was pinned in meticulous curls, and her gaze swept the hallway like she was inspecting furniture. She stopped when she saw me, not out of fear, not out of surprise, but out of irritation that someone she did not approve of was breathing her air. "Mark," she said sharply, "why is there noise in my house? My house. Not our home. Not family home. Not even Hamilton household. My house." Her eyes landed on my daughter next. Still in my arms, still trembling, still holding on to me with the last fragments of her strength. Something dark flickered across the woman's face. Not guilt. Not concern. Annoyance. Annoyance that my daughter wasn't working. Annoyance that she was being comforted. Annoyance that she dared to be human in a place where she had been taught to be useful instead. "What are you doing?" the woman snapped at her. "Put him down. You know better than to handle guests that way." "Yes." The word stung the air like a slap. My daughter flinched against me, instinctively shifting as though expecting punishment. That movement alone told me everything about how she'd been living here, walking through days on eggshells, shrinking every time a voice sharpened. "She's not your maid," I said, voice low, steady. The woman blinked at me, as if hearing a language she hadn't learned. "Excuse me." I took a breath, slow, measured, the way men do when a decade of regret settles into bone. "She is my daughter," I said. A pause. Then the slightest tilt of her head. "Ah," she murmured. "The father." Not said with respect. Not with welcome. Said like an inconvenience finally identified. She gave my daughter a cold, clipped look. "You didn't inform us of his return." My daughter's fingers tightened around my shirt, fear pulsing in the quiet grip I felt against my ribs. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I swear. I didn't know he was coming." The woman sighed, deeply irritated. "There are procedures, dear. Rules. A guest does not simply appear." Guest. There it was again, that word they used to cut her away from me. "I'm not a guest," I said calmly. "I'm her father. I have every right to." "You have no right to disrupt this household," she snapped. "She has responsibilities. We have been patient with her instability, but we do not tolerate." "Instability," I repeated, jaw tightening. The woman's eyes hardened into something colder. "She came here with nothing. No job. No direction. No discipline. We provided structure. A home. Purpose. You provided chains," I said. Her nostrils flared. "We provided charity. She owes us respect." My daughter's breath stuttered, like the word respect carried a weight she'd been crushed under far too many times. "Hamilton," I said softly, addressing the man still leaning smugly nearby. "Did you teach your mother to talk about her like this?" His smirk widened. "She learned on her own." The older woman looked between the two of us, her gaze settling back on my daughter. "Put him down," she ordered again. "And return to your duties before your laziness becomes another problem we must correct." The way my daughter trembled then, the way her fingers loosened as though obeying reflexively, nearly broke me. "Don't," I whispered to her. She froze. Her lips quivered, and for a moment she looked younger than I remembered. The same little girl who once ran to me after nightmares, asking me to make the monsters disappear. Except now they were standing in her hallway, wearing pearls and a smirk. "I'm taking her with me," I said. The woman's posture stiffened. "Absolutely not. She's not staying here. She signed a contract. She was coerced. She owes us labor. She owes you nothing. She is under our care. She is under my protection. She belongs. She belongs to herself." My voice cut through the air like a blade, and for the first time the woman blinked in surprise. Hamilton clenched his jaw. You can't take her. I already have. The woman stepped forward, face tightening. You're not understanding me. She is not ready to leave. She is prone to emotional outbursts, forgetfulness, and mood swings. We have been patient. But she is fragile. Fragile. My daughter flinched like the word itself was a leash. She's not fragile, I said. She's exhausted. You worked her to the bone. She needed structure. She needed compassion. She needed supervision. She needed freedom. She needed correction. She needed love. Silence. Heavy. Tense. Crackling. Then a new voice echoed from deeper in the hallway. Masculine, older, colder. What's going on out here? A tall man emerged, adjusting his cufflinks as if preparing for a performance. His expression carried the same arrogance Hamilton wore, the kind that came from inheritance, not achievement. He took one look at my daughter in my arms and groaned. For God's sake. Not another meltdown. Another. Another. My daughter buried her face in my shoulder, shaking violently. The older man sighed. Set her down. She knows what happens when she interrupts the household schedule. Interrupts schedule. Interrupts. Like she was an appointment slot that misbehaved. I stepped back, tightening my grip protectively. If you touch her, I said quietly, you will not walk away from this moment the same man. He raised an eyebrow. Threats. No, I said. A promise. Hamilton stepped forward, attempting to regain control. Look, she can leave if she wants, but there are conditions. The older woman interjected sharply. What conditions? I demanded. The woman clasped her hands behind her back. She owes us $10,000. My daughter gasped. I never. Hush, the woman snapped. You agreed. No, my daughter whispered. You made me sign papers. You didn't explain. We explained enough, the older man said. Room and board. Food. Supplies. Damages. Emotional strain on the household. She accumulated debt. She leaves when it's paid. My daughter's tears spilled then. Not from fear of leaving, but from the hopelessness of being trapped inside a system designed to keep her kneeling. I looked at the three of them, their expressions, their confidence, the ecosystem of control they'd built. How did she accumulate damages? I asked quietly. She broke a vase, Hamilton's mother said. My daughter covered her mouth, shaking. It fell. I didn't, he pushed. Enough, Hamilton snapped. I turned to him slowly. You pushed her. He looked away. She was being clumsy. The older man sighed with annoyance. This is pointless. She leaves when the debt is paid. Until then, she continues her duties. She's leaving now, I said. Then pay the $10,000. I met my daughter's eyes. She shook her head desperately. A soft, frantic plea. She didn't want me to pay them. She didn't want to be indebted to them again. She didn't want to owe her freedom to the people who stole it. And suddenly I understood. This wasn't just about money. This was about power, control, punishment. If you walk out, the older woman said coldly, she will be taken to court. Taken where? I asked. Tried, she said. For breach of contract. My daughter clutched me tightly, breath shattering in waves. Dad, please don't let them. I placed my hand softly on the back of her head. I'm not letting anyone take you anywhere. Hamilton smirked. You can't fight us. You have no idea what I can do, I said. The older man stepped forward. She leaves with us or she goes nowhere. I looked at all three of them, letting the moment settle, letting the weight of it carve itself into the walls. Then I whispered, calm and unshaken. Call the police. The family stiffened. Hamilton frowned. What? You heard me, I said. Call them. We don't need. You do, I interrupted. Because I want them here when she tells them everything you've done. The woman's face blanched. Hamilton swallowed hard. The older man stiffened like someone had yanked invisible strings in his spine. You wouldn't, he muttered. I would, I said softly. And I will. My daughter looked at me, really looked, and for the first time I saw fear melting into something else. Belief. We'll lose everything, the woman whispered to her husband. He didn't answer. Hamilton stepped back a fraction, voice breaking. You don't understand how this works." "I do," I said. "It ends now." Silence poured through the hallway. Heavy. Dangerous. Final. My daughter's fingers curled into my shirt, not with fear this time, but with release, the kind that bursts through ribs and finally lets the heart breathe. "We're leaving," I said again. No one stopped us. Not a single hand reached out. Not a single voice dared to command her. Because in that house built on arrogance, cruelty, and the quiet obedience of a girl who forgot her worth, a father had returned. And the entire foundation trembled. The hallway felt different as we moved through it. Not wider, not warmer, but no longer owned by the people standing in it. My daughter still clung to me, her breaths uneven, her body too light in my arms, as if this house had hollowed her out from the inside and left only survival behind. Behind us, the Hamiltons didn't speak. Predators grow quiet when they realize their power is no longer the loudest thing in the room. We reached the foyer, and I felt her fingers tighten again. Not from fear, but from the disbelieving ache of finally crossing a threshold she'd been trapped behind for too long. "Wait," she whispered suddenly. I stopped. "What is it?" Her eyes flicked toward the staircase. A small frightened glance, as if part of her had left pieces of herself hidden in corners she wasn't allowed to revisit. I need something," she said, voice trembling. "Just one thing." "Show me." She led me upstairs, her steps hesitant, like each stair remembered a moment she wished she didn't. The Hamiltons remained in the foyer, watching with tight jaws and clenched fists, but none of them dared follow. We stopped in front of a door near the end of the hall, a door I hadn't seen earlier. Not her maid's quarters. This one had a small crack in the frame, like it had been slammed too many times by someone who knew how to make wood obey. She looked up at me. "Please, let me open it." I nodded. Her trembling hand reached for the knob. The door opened with a familiar creak, and I understood instantly why she had been afraid to come here. It wasn't her room. It wasn't anyone's room. It was storage. A space for things the Hamiltons didn't value. A place where sunlight did not enter. Boxes stacked on one another. Old coats. Tangled Christmas lights. Filing cabinets with peeling labels. And in the corner, beneath a thin layer of dust, was a small wooden box, carved with the tiny flower pattern she used to draw in the margins of her school notebooks. Her box. The only piece of her childhood she had brought into this house. She crossed the room slowly, knelt and lifted it with both hands, gently, reverently, the way one carries the last unbroken memory of who they used to be. Inside, I knew what I would find, because I had given it to her a lifetime ago. "Can I keep it?" she whispered. "You don't need to ask permission for what's already yours," I said. She nodded, tears falling silently, sliding off her chin and landing on the lid of the box. Soft little taps that sounded like apologies she'd whispered to herself too many nights. She held the box tightly to her chest, and for a moment she didn't move. She just breathed into the memory of who she had once been. A girl with dreams. A girl with warmth. A girl who used to run barefoot through our yard just to feel alive. Her voice shook. I thought if I kept this, then some part of me would still belong to me. I knelt beside her. "Everything about you belongs to you." From the doorway a new voice entered, small, unsure. Excuse me?" We turned sharply. Hamilton's sister stood there, younger, maybe 20. Eyes softer than the others. Hands fidgeting nervously. She wasn't cold. She wasn't cruel. She was scared. She looked at my daughter, then at me, then back at the box in her hands. "Mom and Dad," she began, swallowing hard. "They're worse when you're not around. I tried to help sometimes. I swear I did. But they don't listen to anyone." My daughter's grip tightened reflexively around the box. The girl continued, voice trembling. "I shouldn't say this, but don't come back. Ever. They'll never change. And you deserve better than this." Silence draped itself across the room. A heavy curtain closing over years of unspoken suffering. My daughter whispered, almost too softly to hear. "Thank you." The girl gave a broken nod, eyes glossy. "I'm sorry," she said. "For everything." She stepped back, wiping her face, and for once, a Hamilton didn't block the exit. We walked past her. Down the hallway. Down the stairs. Toward the front door that had become a cage. But just as we reached it, the older woman snarled, "If she walks out that door, she'll regret it." I turned to her slowly. She already regrets every day she stayed. The older man stepped forward. We aren't done. I am, I said. Hamilton's voice broke into a desperate shout, the first crack in the cruel confidence he wore like armor. She's lying. She's lying about all of it. I looked him dead in the eye. His voice, his posture, his entire being stank of a man unraveling. Then call the police, I said again. Let's see who they believe. His mouth snapped shut, fear settling over him like a shadow he couldn't outrun. And finally, with the box in her arms and her head resting against my shoulder, my daughter and I stepped across the threshold. The air outside hit her face like freedom she wasn't ready to trust yet. Her knees buckled slightly, and I held her tighter, guiding her down the steps slowly, letting her feel each inch of ground she was reclaiming. At the bottom of the stairs, she whispered, "Dad, are you sure we can leave?" I turned to her, my child who had endured storms she never should have faced alone, and I brushed her hair back, the way I used to after playground scrapes and heartbreaks she thought were the end of the world. "Yes," I said, "because I'm here now." She closed her eyes, a long trembling breath, and the first real sob tore through her chest, raw and aching, as though years of silence had finally found permission to break open. I held her as the Hamiltons watched through their perfect windows, powerless for the first time. And when she finally steadied, we walked toward the car. Not running, not hiding, just leaving. Together. But the story wasn't over. Rescuing her from that house was only the beginning, because the world outside still needed to know what they had done. And I was not going to let their shadows follow her into the future she deserved. Not again. Not ever. The car door closed with a soft thud that felt too small for the magnitude of what had just happened. My daughter sat in the passenger seat clutching the wooden box to her chest, as if letting go of it would pull her back into a life she was finally escaping. Her fingers trembled around its edges, and even though the engine hadn't started yet, she leaned her head against the window like she needed the coolness of the glass to steady her breathing. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I watched her reflection, hollowed, haunted, but flickering with something unfamiliar. Not hope. Not yet. Something more delicate than that. The fragile beginning of self-remembering. "You okay?" I whispered. She nodded, but the movement was small, weak, the kind of nod people make when they're afraid their voice will betray them. Her first breath came out in pieces. Her second was a little steadier. The third finally sounded like air instead of survival. We pulled away from the curb slowly, the Hamilton house shrinking in the rearview mirror, a quiet threat losing its size with every passing foot. She watched it fade without blinking, as if afraid the house would leap up and swallow her back inside if she dared look away. A single tear slid down her cheek. She didn't wipe it. She just let it fall. "Where are we going?" she whispered. "Somewhere safe." Her shoulders sank with an exhaustion so deep it made her chest shake. We drove in silence through the quiet streets, the morning sun just beginning to break through the clouds, brushing pale gold across her face. Every streetlight we passed seemed to reflect her memories back at her, pieces of the last 2 years she couldn't outrun. When we hit a long stretch of road lined with maple trees, her breath hitched and she pressed her forehead to her knees. "I can't believe I'm actually out," she whispered, voice muffled. I thought I'd die in that house." The words slipped out before she could hide them. They weren't dramatic. They weren't exaggerated. They were truth finally given permission to breathe. I pulled onto the shoulder and put the car in park. "Look at me." She lifted her head slowly, eyes red, face damp. "You're safe," I said. "You're with me. And no one, not those people, not their threats, not their contracts, owns a single piece of you anymore." A sob tore out of her then, sharp and sudden like something ripping free inside her ribs. It came from a place I couldn't reach, the kind of place trauma buries itself and hope rarely visits. I reached over and held her hand, the same hand that used to grip my finger when she was learning to walk. She leaned into me like someone who'd been holding up the sky by herself for too long. When she finally steadied, she wiped her face with her sleeve and whispered, "I'm sorry." "For what?" "For needing you." My chest tightened. "Never apologize for that." She nodded weakly, as if trying to believe it. We drove again, slowly, carefully, until we reached a small overlook on the edge of town. The river wound below us, quiet and wide, the morning light softening everything it touched. I parked the car and let the stillness settle. She stared out over the water, her fingers absently brushing the carved lid of her wooden box. When did it start? I asked gently. How did you end up there? Her breath caught, but she didn't turn away. It was right after your last email, she whispered. The one where you said the contract might get extended again. That you'd try to come home by Christmas. The memory hit me like a weight on the chest. I was behind on bills, she continued. I lost my job. Then the mortgage slipped. I tried, Dad. I tried everything. Her voice cracked, and she pressed a hand to her forehead. I didn't want to ask you for help. I didn't want to be a burden. And the Hamiltons, they seemed kind at first. They said I could stay for a few weeks while I figured things out. She swallowed hard. But kindness has a way of changing shape when someone realizes you have nowhere else to go. Her shoulders curled inward. One day they asked me to help with dishes. Just for a day, they said. Then laundry. Then cleaning. And every time I tried to say no, they reminded me I owed them gratitude. Gratitude. For exploitation. For swallowing her pride to survive. They took my phone, she whispered. They told me I was too distracted. Then they said I was too emotional. Then too forgetful. Then too dependent. She hugged the wooden box tighter. After a while, I believed them. I closed my eyes because some kinds of pain don't fit inside words. When did they start hurting you? I asked softly. She looked at her arms. At the fading bruises. At the fresh ones blooming beneath the surface. The first time was over a broken plate, she said. Mark grabbed my arm too hard. I told myself it was an accident. The second time was because I interrupted them while they were eating. The third time, I don't even remember what I did. I just remember the fear. Her voice shook so violently the words nearly fell apart. And every time I thought about leaving, they reminded me of the debt. They said I was lucky to have a roof. Lucky to have food. Lucky to have them. Her eyes filled again. I wanted to call you, Dad. But I didn't want to hear disappointment in your voice. I didn't want to admit I'd failed. You didn't fail, I said instantly. You survived. She looked at me, really looked, as though those words rearranged something inside her. If you hadn't shown up today, she whispered, I don't know who I would have become. I brushed a tear from her cheek. Someone worth saving. Someone worth fighting for. Someone who deserved better than every second she spent in that house. Her chin trembled and the smallest, softest sound escaped her. The sound of a girl beginning to believe she wasn't broken. We sat there for a long time, letting the river breathe for us. When her breathing finally steadied, she whispered, They won't let this go. They're not the kind of people who just accept losing someone they controlled. I know, I said quietly. And the contract. I'll handle it. And the debt. I'll handle it. And the threats. I'll handle every part of it. She closed her eyes, leaning against the seat. What if they come after me? She asked. I reached over and gently tucked her hair behind her ear, the way I did when she was 5 and afraid of storms. Then they'll learn, I said, that I didn't spend 10 years away from you just to let anyone hurt you again. She exhaled, slow, shaky, but with a new steadiness at the edges. We need to go somewhere first, I told her. Not home. Not yet. She looked at me questioningly. Where? To tell someone what happened. Fear tightened her jaw. The police. Yes. Her eyes filled again, but not from fear this time. From relief. From anticipation. From the realization that her voice was finally allowed to matter. Dad, will you stay with me? Every second, I said. She nodded slowly, pressing her forehead to the window, watching the sunlight break through the clouds, painting the water gold, the first gentle hint of a morning she might one day trust. Okay, she whispered. We can go. The police station felt colder than the morning air outside. Not the kind of cold that chills skin, the kind that settles in the bones of people who enter carrying something heavy on their backs. My daughter held her wooden box tightly, almost like a shield, and stood so close to me that our arms brushed every few seconds. Inside, everything hummed with quiet routine. Printers' footsteps, the low murmur of conversations that carried the weight of stories no one would fully understand. A young officer at the front desk glanced up as we approached, eyes flicking from me to her, to the bruises she couldn't hide even if she tried. Can I help you? He asked. I nodded. We need to file a report. My daughter tensed, breath catching halfway into her lungs. The officer's gaze softened, not in pity but in recognition. He had seen this before. Too many times. People arriving with ghosts clinging to their voices. Okay, he said softly. Come with me. We followed him through a narrow hallway into a small interview room. My daughter's steps faltered at the doorway, her fingers tightening around my sleeve. I turned toward her. I'm right here, I whispered. She nodded, took a breath that shook and stepped inside. The room was simple. A table, 2 chairs, a water bottle left unopened on the counter. She sat slowly, as if the chair might collapse beneath the weight of everything she had carried in silence. The officer opened a form on his screen. All right, he said gently. Whenever you're ready, you can tell me what happened. My daughter froze. Her lips parted but no words came. Her throat worked but no sound crossed it. Her eyes glossed instantly with panic. I reached across the table and took her hand, the same hand that had scrubbed floors for people who thought themselves better. You don't need to be strong, I said. You only need to speak. She looked at me, really looked, and something inside her finally cracked. A soft, fragile crack, like the first break in ice before a river thaws. It wasn't one thing, she whispered. The officer leaned in slightly. Take your time. She closed her eyes, inhaled sharply, exhaled in pieces. They were cruel, she whispered. Every day. In different ways. For so long that I forgot what normal felt like. Her voice trembled but she didn't stop. It started with chores. Small things. Just helping out. Then they said I wasn't helping enough. They said I owed them time. Effort. Respect. Her fingers curled around mine with a desperate grip. Then they took my phone. They said I didn't need it. They didn't want me distracted. They wanted me available. All the time. The officer typed quietly, not interrupting, not rushing, not flinching at her words. They told me I was forgetful. That I made mistakes. That I needed structure. They told me I was emotional. Overreacting. Sensitive. Ungrateful. Each word came out thinner, weaker. They made me feel small. They made me feel wrong. Her voice cracked then. A single tear slipped down her cheek. The officer lowered his hands from the keyboard. Did they ever hurt you physically? He asked softly. She nodded once, twice, slow, defeated. They grabbed me, she whispered. Shoved me. Pulled me. Yelled in my face. They controlled everything I touched. Everything I did. Every second of my day. She looked at me then, ashamed, fragile, breaking. And I let them, she whispered. I squeezed her hand gently. They manipulated you. They isolated you. That's not letting. That's surviving. She inhaled a shaky breath. The officer asked, Do you recall who harmed you physically? She nodded again. Mark. His father. Sometimes his mother. Her voice softened into something hollow. They said I was too much. Too emotional. Too needy. They said I should be grateful for a roof. Food. Work. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I started believing them, she whispered. I started thinking maybe they were right. Maybe I deserved all of it. The officer looked at her. Not like a victim, not like a witness, but like someone who had finally found her voice after years of being silenced. I'm sorry, he said quietly. You didn't deserve any of that. My daughter's lip trembled. She looked down at the wooden box in her lap, at the carved flowers, the tiny latch, the memories inside. Can I show you something? She asked. The officer nodded. She opened the box carefully. Inside were a photograph of her at 17, beaming, arms around me, the world still soft around the edges. A bracelet she made in school, cheap beads, fading elastic, a childish charm. A folded piece of paper with her handwriting, the one she used the night before I left for the airport a decade ago. She unfolded it slowly. I'll be okay, Dad. I'm strong because of you. Her eyes flooded. I wanted to believe that version of me still existed, she whispered. It does, I said. She took a shuddering breath and looked at the officer. I want to press charges. The officer nodded firmly. We can do that. She swallowed hard, steadied herself. There's more, she whispered. They made me sign papers. Contracts. Debts I never agreed to. They forced me to work for things I didn't break. They kept me scared. They kept me obedient. The officer typed again. All right. We'll need those documents. They're in the house, she said quietly. In their office. In a folder with my name on it. We'll get them, he said. But first, we'll file for emergency protection. They won't be allowed near you. For a moment, just a moment, her shoulders eased. Not relaxed. Not healed. Just loosened. As if the air around her had grown a little less heavy. The officer stood. I'll get the paperwork. When the door closed, she turned to me. Dad. Yes. Do you think I'll ever feel normal again? I shook my head gently. No, I said. Her breath caught. But you'll feel free. That's better. Her eyes softened, not bright, not shining, but steady like the first light after a long storm. She leaned her head on my shoulder. And for the first time, her silence wasn't fear. It was healing. The next 48 hours unfolded like slow dawn. Not sudden, not bright, but steady, warm, and unavoidably revealing. My daughter stayed at my temporary apartment, a small place overlooking the river, its windowsills lined with plants the previous tenant had forgotten. She slept most of the first day, curled beneath blankets that didn't smell of bleach or fear. Every now and then she'd wake abruptly, eyes wide, breath racing, as though she expected someone to burst through the door. And every time I was there, I would sit beside her, place a hand gently on her shoulder, and remind her that no one owned her anymore. Safety takes time to trust. By the second morning, she could walk to the kitchen without glancing over her shoulder. By evening, she could sit by the window without flinching at footsteps in the hallway. Small things, quiet things, but when you've lived in shadows long enough, even breathing can feel like rebellion. The police called late that night. They had obtained a warrant. They had gone into the Hamilton house. They had found documents, receipts, bank statements, records of deductions, contracts signed under pressure, reports of damages artificially increased, and enough evidence of coercion to freeze the air between the officer's words. They wanted her at the station the next morning, not for questioning but to sign the statements formally legally so the charges could move forward. When I hung up the phone and told her, something shifted in her expression. Not fear. Not anxiety. Stillness. The stillness of someone preparing to reclaim their voice. The next morning we returned to the station. Her steps were steadier this time, her back straighter, her breath deeper. She wasn't healed. The marks of those 2 years clung to her, but she was rising in ways I don't think she even recognized yet. When we entered the interview room, the lead investigator was waiting. A woman in her 40s with a clipboard and steady eyes that didn't judge, didn't pity, just understood. Thank you for coming back, she said. My daughter nodded. We need your signature on the formal statement, the investigator explained. It will allow us to proceed with charges for coercion, forced labor, assault, and unlawful confinement. My daughter's breath wavered, not weakly, but with the weight of realizing the truth was no longer just whispered. It was documented. Pursued. Taken seriously. She signed. Her hand shook slightly, but she didn't pause. She didn't ask for reassurance. She didn't look to me for approval. She signed her name with a kind of quiet finality. The act of someone closing a door that should never have been opened in her life. When she finished, the investigator gave a small nod of respect. We're also issuing emergency protection for you, she said. They cannot contact you. They cannot come near you. If they do, we will act immediately. My daughter inhaled, deeply, shakily, and something in her chest seemed to unlock. The investigator continued, voice gentle. There's more. My daughter stiffened. We interviewed the Hamiltons earlier this morning. A beat. A shift in the air. A tremor under my daughter's ribs. They were less composed than we expected, the officer said. My daughter's fingers tightened around the edge of the chair. What do you mean? She whispered. The investigator leaned forward slightly. Mark was defensive. His father was angry. His mother was dismissive. But their daughter, she corroborated everything. Every detail. My daughter froze. What? She supported your story. Fully. Consistently. And she gave us information we didn't even know to ask. My daughter covered her mouth, tears rushing to her eyes. The investigator continued. She said she tried to help you, that she was afraid of her parents, that she saw more than you realized. A quiet sob escaped my daughter's lips. You're not alone in this, the investigator said softly. You have witnesses, evidence, and you have support. My daughter shook her head slowly, tears streaming freely now, falling onto her hands, her lap, the floor, tears that weren't fear, tears that weren't shame, tears of relief, of recognition, of being believed. You did the bravest thing you could have done, the investigator told her. My daughter whispered. I was so scared. You came anyway, the woman replied. That's courage. When we stepped out into the lobby, sunlight streamed through the windows, warm, bright, almost startling in its gentleness. She paused in the middle of the floor, eyes closed, letting the glow touch her face. Her breathing slowed, her shoulders lowered, her hands unclenched. She stood there for a full minute, silent, steady, and I didn't interrupt. I simply watched the light find her. When she opened her eyes again, she whispered, I don't want to be afraid of the world anymore. You won't be, I said. Not even of myself, she added quietly. My chest tightened. You never needed to be afraid of yourself. But they made me feel like I was the problem. They lied, I said. Every day. About everything. She lifted her chin slightly. A movement so subtle yet so powerful. I want to live again, Dad. And you will. I want to work. I want to make friends. I want to laugh without wondering who's watching. You will. Her eyes glimmered with something new. Something unmistakable. Not defiance. Not desperation. But self-recognition. I want my life back, she said. And the way she said it, steady, firm, with a crack of fire in her voice, told me she had already begun taking it. We walked out of the station together. Not like victims. Not like fugitives. Not like people running from the past. We walked out like people returning to the world after a long, brutal storm. Carrying scars, carrying truth, carrying each other. And for the first time since stepping into that house, she wasn't trembling. Healing doesn't arrive all at once. It doesn't kick open the door, flood the room, or declare itself with trumpet blasts. It arrives quietly, in breaths taken without fear, in footsteps that don't flinch at shadows, in mornings that feel less like battles and more like beginnings. And that is how her life restarted. Not in a dramatic way. Not with celebration. But with quiet, steady changes that gradually replaced the weight she had carried for far too long. The first change came 3 days after leaving the police station. She woke before sunrise, not from nightmares, but from the sound of birds outside the window, singing without asking permission, filling the room with a kind of chaos she hadn't heard in years. She sat up slowly, the wooden box perched beside her on the nightstand. For a moment she just stared at it. Not with fear, not with grief, but with something softer. Recognition. She opened it and took out the photograph of us from before everything fractured. Her hands no longer shook when she touched it. She traced the edges gently, as though restoring something time had tried to fade. I want a new picture someday, she said softly. And you'll have one, I replied from the kitchen doorway. She looked at me, really looked, and smiled, small and fragile but real. The second change came when we met with the victim support counselor. A soft-spoken woman with warm eyes, she ushered us into her office, offering tea neither of us touched. My daughter answered questions with more confidence than anyone expected. She told her story in fragments, not rushing, not hiding. And when she reached the part about the first time they hurt her, she didn't cry. She breathed. Slow. Deep. Steady. Afterward, she stood in the corridor, staring at the long row of windows overlooking the street outside. I always thought if I told someone, no one would care, she whispered. People care, I said. You weren't meant to suffer alone. She shook her head. I wasn't meant to suffer at all. It was the closest she had come to anger, the healthy kind, the reclaiming kind. The third change came when the police called again. The Hamiltons have been served, the officer said. They're under investigation. They're not allowed near you. My daughter didn't cower. She didn't tremble. She didn't choke on fear. She nodded, eyes sharp, jaw set. Good. One word. But it carried the strength of everything she had survived. Over the next weeks, she rebuilt herself in small, deliberate movements. She took long showers, not rushed, not timed, not afraid of being yelled at for using too much water. She walked in the park, her steps light for the first time in years. She read books again. She laughed sometimes, short, unsure laughs that seemed surprised to find their way out of her throat. One afternoon, she sat beside me on a bench by the river, the water shimmering under the late-day sun. She rested her head against my shoulder, speaking with a tenderness that almost unraveled me. "I feel like I'm waking up," she said. "You are. And I'm scared," she whispered. "You're waking up bravely. There's a difference." She smiled at that, a slow, unfolding smile that reached her eyes. Over time, the nightmares came less often. The panic lessened. The shadows lost their shape. And gradually, she allowed herself to imagine a life after trauma, not defined by it, not haunted by it, but informed by the strength she forged surviving it. But healing alone wasn't enough. There was still justice. The hearing was set for late autumn. The courthouse loomed tall and gray, its steps worn by the feet of countless stories, countless battles. She held my hand as we entered, not out of dependence but solidarity. We walked in together, steady and united. The Hamiltons were already inside. They sat on one side of the room, rigid, tight-lipped, swollen with the same arrogance that had once convinced them they were untouchable. Their daughter avoided her parents' eyes, sitting slightly apart, hands shaking in her lap. But my daughter didn't look at any of them. She looked straight ahead. When her name was called, she walked to the front, slowly, deliberately, each step a reclaiming of the ground stolen from her. She stood tall, her shoulders squared, the wooden box tucked safely inside her bag next to her seat. The judge asked for her statement. She breathed in. She breathed out. And then she told her story. She didn't whisper. She didn't break. She didn't apologize. She spoke clearly, her voice unwavering, her truth cutting through the courtroom with quiet power. She described the manipulation, the labor, the fear, the bruises, the threats, the loneliness, the nights she thought no one would ever save her. She didn't spare the Hamiltons. She didn't soften the truth. She didn't hide the pain. By the time she finished, the room was silent. Not the empty silence of indifference. The heavy, reverent silence of people witnessing courage they couldn't ignore. The judge leaned forward, voice gentle but firm. "Thank you for your bravery." For the first time, she didn't shrink from praise. She nodded, steady, composed. The Hamiltons' lawyer tried to discredit her, but every attempt collapsed under the evidence, the witnesses, the documented injuries, the digital messages retrieved from the house's system. Even their daughter's testimony cracked their confidence further. "Everything she said is true," she whispered. "I'm sorry I didn't help her sooner." And just like that, the dynasty that once ruled their home with cruelty began to crumble. When the ruling came, protective orders, criminal charges, financial penalties, my daughter didn't cheer. She didn't gloat. She didn't cry. She just exhaled long, deep, freeing, as though releasing the final piece of a nightmare she had been forced to swallow for far too long. Outside the courthouse, she stood on the steps, watching a gust of wind scatter fallen leaves across the pavement. She looked at her hands, the same hands that had scrubbed floors, carried fear, and held onto hope with trembling fingers. Then she looked at me. "I'm not who I was," she said quietly. "No," I replied. "You're stronger." She nodded slowly. "I want a new beginning," she whispered. "And you'll have it." She took my hand, not the way a frightened girl holds on, but the way a woman rising from the ashes stabilizes herself only long enough to take her next step. "Dad," she said, "thank you for coming back." I felt my throat tighten. "I'll spend the rest of my life making up for the years I wasn't here." She smiled, warm, steady, the kind that glowed from a place deep inside her healing. "You already started." And right there on the courthouse steps, beneath the quiet hum of passing traffic and the soft rustle of autumn leaves, she let go of the last piece of the past that didn't belong to her anymore. She stepped forward, toward the future, toward herself, toward the life she was finally choosing, freely, fully, unapologetically. And for the first time since I returned home, she walked without fear. I returned after 10 years abroad, and found my daughter living as a maid in her own home. But I also found a truth deeper than regret, that even the most broken moments can become doorways to redemption. Today she stands taller than the shadows that once held her, a reminder that freedom doesn't arrive in a single moment, It returns slowly, in every breath reclaimed, in every step forward, in every quiet whisper that says, I survived. And I'm not going back.